I try to run through the trends or development of the fire in Finland and how it's affected biodiversity. So I start now presenting. So first of all, can you see it? The title slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's go on. First, a little bit about the past biohistory. So without human or with a pre-industrialized, or let's say with a hunter-gatherer time, whatever you want to look, they are quite different, or they vary quite a lot. So like in all Fennoscandia, so the shortest fire intervals from eastern Finland are under 50 years, but then you also have studies where you have 5 or 100,000 years, even more. And there are several reasons. In different time, the climate and human influence has been different, and they've been increasing and decreasing time. Vegetation, forest structure, even the methodology, dendrochronology or sediment analysis. But I won't go, I just want to note that if you look, you get quite a different picture. Okay, and then when we are in eastern Finland, it's good to keep in mind the slash and burn. As you can see, it was in the past, or let's say 200 or 300 years ago, quite widely practiced, and this has a big impact on biodiversity and our fire regime, as we can see. The painting is classic painting from near Collier or from eastern Finland. But as you can see, the slash and burn decreased quite quickly, but actually it's relatively short time since it was practiced, and this really maybe has had an impact, like we were discussing. And the legacies, first it made changes in fire regime, so it changes the fuel quantity, and there were escapes of these slash and burn areas. So there was kind of a fire pulse in our Finnish forest nature. So there's an unnaturally high fire activity, and this fire pulse kind of still shows. And then when these former slash and burn areas combined with grazing, they kind of created a mosaic of various stands, meadows, and pastures, which were quite rich in biodiversity. And this is a famous Gylden's map from 1850, and as you can see, vast, huge areas of Finland were in a state of natural forest, so probably they were old growth, or at least very stocked, very large uninhabited areas of forest. But then in many parts of Finland, like here in eastern Finland, there's a shortage of forest, which is mainly due to slash and burn. So this is good to keep in mind. This is Aho in Finnish, former slash and burn area taken as pasture, and then it led to kind of mosaic landscape like this that you had maybe 150 years. So in many parts of Finland, there's something landscape resembling something like this. And then they developed into these kind of a birch or grey alder or mixed forest, and it's nice to know that some of the, like this whiteback woodpecker, which is considered an umbrella species, benefited probably from this fire pulse leading to these young deciduous stands. And there are also some other species that can be considered, and that's why the whiteback woodpecker is considered as an umbrella species, kind of indicating this kind of old kaski, koivikko, old stands of broadleaf trees. And it's a good question to ask, did we have an unnaturally high biodiversity in late 19th, early 20th century, because there was this legacy of slash and burn agriculture and use of old agriculture, grazing using pasture lands, glades, and then we had a lot of these fire-driven habitats and still relatively low impact of forestry and areas in natural state. Okay, then we go to the current fire regime, and Finland is 5th or 6th biggest country in Europe and has the highest covered forest, but if you compare the forest fire area, it's very low. If you compare to Sweden, you can see, we'll come to this later, but it kind of differs in the area. And everybody, of course, knows that Donald Trump noticed this and said that they don't have any problems because of raking and cleaning, and everybody was laughing, but maybe there was some truth, like the Finnish fire regime is an anomaly in a way. And if not rake, but this, if you consider cleaning and raking something that there's a heavy export of biomass, then there's some truth behind this. Here is a constructed series according to the statistics and starting from 1865, and 2-3 things. First, as you can see, it was the high variation between years, that even in 20s and 30s we had years with tens of thousands, even 60,000 annual burned hectares. But then in very rapidly in 50s and 60s we went to this kind of modern fire regime that it was kind of squeezed out the variation, a natural variation between summers because of the heavy forest fire suppression and also changes in landscape, in forest structure. And interesting thing is that within 25 years, where it has been similar way to compile statistics, there's practically no increase, no decrease. So the fire regime in Finland has stayed very stable, considering to many other countries, which is also interesting. And if we look at the you can see that if you compare to pre-war times to last 50-60 years, there's about 5% forest fires or burned areas and forest fire habitats compared to that. An interesting thing, if you see compared to Sweden and Finland and Karelia, in Sweden and Karelia you still have this variation between, and generally the burned areas are higher, and you still have these high fire years. And you can also see here in last 50 or 40-50 years there's been only 2 fires over 200 hectares, but in many parts of Sweden, or in Sweden they have been common, and of course you have these 2 big fire events. Should be 2014 and 2018. There's a mistake there. So there's a lot of small intensity surface fires, and the reason is fire suppression and actions on roads. And I don't have time to go to details more in the seminar on 5th of May. But here is just one picture that might show that if you compare to the forest road network, so this explains at least some of it. So how this has affected biodiversity? First, we have the fresh burned areas, like there's 5% of these out of what used to be, so these kind of unique areas have decreased. Then we have forest structures, like this multi-layered cohort structure that, for instance, in Sweden, they are really eager to restore and maintain by prescribed burnings, especially in northern Finland. Probably these kind of forest structures were much more common in a different fire regime and different forest management time. Then another interesting thing is that we have this sun-exposed or sunlit habitats, dry, barren, that were kind of maintained or shaped or driven by frequent forest fires, creating these kind of open, dry forests that differed from normal forest, you can say. and it's known that they host several species that are adapted to these circumstances, and it's also typical that they have certain key species, plant species, and there's this wide pool of complicated symbiotic relationships. So this is why a lot of them have become endangered. And there's this pool. You have like dry meadows also, but especially these esker slope, dry pine forest, and heathlands. These are all fire-driven or fire-influenced in a way or two, and actually all of these have the share of these have decreased. So this is what happened ecologically. The former areas like this are going into these stocked dense areas. At the same time, the humus layer is thickened or becomes less thin, and lichens and revealed mineral soil patches are turned into the moss-dominated places. Here you have a classic. You have a endangered bluewing, and then the thyme, which is known to thrive in these kind of habitats, and then you have a certain ant species, and then you have parasitic wasps that are using these ant species. This means that in a certain phase the larva, the caterpillar, is going as a parasite in these ant nests, and the whole idea behind it is that these kind of habitats have decreased. So there's a pool of
3 more minutes.
Thank you. And there's a pool of forest that shift depends on the human disturbance and fire. There are a huge area that depends on the fire regime, and now we are moving into this, or have moved into this direction, into more mesic direction. And you can see that it's in 50 years, there's been a big decrease in these xeric and barren dry types. And this also shows in red list species. Out of our little more than 800 endangered forest species, about 3% is considered to be adapted or dependent on burn areas, but then you have 16% of these dry and barren sun-exposed areas, which is actually quite a large number. And also, if you look at the threatened habitats, these esker forest and xeric heath forest and barren heath forest are fairly well represented. Here are some example species. Typically, you have bugs and beetles in these burned areas utilizing burned wood, and then you have certain plant species, and then typically you have these homoptera and aphids and moths in these sun-exposed habitats. A lot of them have become engaged. And then finally, the landscape aspect. Like in many groups, this Eastern Finland hosts rich species pools in fire-dependent species. So there's two reasons: the Russian source population and the shorter history of intense forest management makes that in Eastern Finland the situation is better, to put it in simple way. And here is also one study of it that demonstrates it. If you look at the Pyrophilo species, you can see it in the eastern part of the study design. They were more common, as well as red-listed species in general, and as well as red-listed Pyrophilo species. So what you can conclude here is that these forest fire areas in both sides of the Russo-Finnish border, or the Karelian Finnish border, can be considered as high conservation value forests, and they should be utilized in conservation and protection acts. So because the input or the interest, the value to doing that is higher than other parts, at least in southwestern parts of Finland, because of this fire continuity and these source populations from Russia. And then finally, there's going to be a coming event go into the pages, and it's going to be on next week, Wednesday, and it's going to concentrate on forest fires and a lot more about these differences in Fennoscandia. So it's open for everybody, so please go if you're interested. Thank you. Did I make it in time?
Thank you, Henrik. It was exact.